Actually, I plan to live to at least 100. However, if it doesn't work out that way, I just want to say now that I don't want a big funeral. I don't want a lot of flowers or eulogies or anything like that. I'd just like a few of my close friends to get together and try to bring me back to life.
Good evening. First off, I'm going to ask that all of us turn our cell phones and shoe phones off. Good evening. My name is Jim Beaver, and on behalf of the unbelievably large family of Don Adams, I'd like to welcome you and thank you to coming this evening to this celebration of Don's life. I was Don's son-in-law. Until her death last year, I was married to his daughter Cecily. I knew Don for 20 years. Of course, I'd known him for much longer than that through television, and to me he was an icon, a legend. So when I started dating his daughter, I was, of course, a little bit intimidated. Cecily warned me that he probably would hate me. Something about how I was a little taller than he was, I don't know. But somehow it didn't turn out that way. He seemed to like me, and I seemed to like him. Don was a difficult man to get to know, I found. He was a difficult man in many ways. He and I found common ground together in 3 areas. We were both serious old movie buffs and trivia experts. We were both ex-Marines, and we both believed that whenever we were in each other's company, we were in the presence of genius. His genius. Don was proud of his career. He was proud of his talents. He was proud of his knowledge of history. He knew more about Abraham Lincoln and Adolf Hitler than any person I've ever met or heard of. But my sense is that even more than all these things, even more than his fame and the worldwide renown for his public achievements, that the thing he was proudest of was having been a combat Marine in World War II. Landing with the Marines on one of the bloodiest battlegrounds of the war, Guadalcanal, Don saw horror and death and destruction beyond that which most of us can even imagine. Virtually all of his rifle platoon was wiped out, and Don was spared this fate primarily because he fell victim to one of the deadliest tropical diseases known to man, blackwater fever. He was written off for dead, and he survived, I believe, primarily through strength of will. He recuperated for an entire year in a hospital in the South Pacific, during which time most of his friends and comrades from his old company were killed in the Battle of Tarawa. It's my belief that Don never forgave himself for having survived them. And when he was well enough, he was assigned to bury the battle dead. It's only in recent years that sophisticated studies have been made of the effects of such experiences on young men. But these studies are rife with examples of men who came back, men from this greatest generation, the World War II generation, who came back totally or almost totally unable to relate to their own family and friends. That Don was able to do so even a little, I think, was a testament to his strength and his will. And I am convinced that much of the pain and difficulty in his life was either created or amplified in the jungles of Guadalcanal. They do not give Purple Hearts for this sort of injury. Losing a leg or an arm will get a man a well-deserved medal. Losing pieces of his heart and soul will not. till the last landing's made and we stand unafraid on a shore no mortal has seen, till the last bugle call sounds taps for us all. It's Semper Fidelis, Marine. There's another poem that was dear to Don's heart. 2 years ago, when Cecily was diagnosed with cancer, he came to her hospital room. He was in a wheelchair. He was weak from his own illness and a broken hip. He held her hand, and he cried, and he recited from heart the words of William Ernest Henley. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade. And yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. A dozen years or so ago, in happier times, Don and Cecily were returning home from the lovely resort village of Santa Anita, where they had gone apparently to encourage the livestock and to deplete their fortunes. On the way back, Cecily, who was driving, pulled into a gas station for gas. She sat next to the pump for a moment or two, and then she said, "Well, Dad, aren't you going to get out and pump the gas?" And Don said, "Look at me, Cecily. I'm not just your father. I'm a legend. And legends don't pump gas." Thank you for joining me as we salute the legend and the man, Don Adams.
We'll start with the Shemai. Those of you that are Jews, move up. We'll clear something up now. Don's father, as the soul, was Jewish. His mother wasn't, and I kept saying, "Your father was Jewish." Why do you keep bringing that up? Synagogue to him was a bad stable in the Bronx. We knew each other for 50 tough years. When I say tough, I worked with him on his shows. I did a 2-part series, and then we did an hour special called Hooray for Hollywood, which was very, very good, and I must say it in all fairness, but I was ready for a breakdown. When I said in the sketch, whatever I would say, "Hi, the men will be here shortly," he would say, "Is that the way you're going to say it? Are you going to screw up this whole goddamn show by saying it like that?" And then I had to kiss his ass for about an hour. Pardon my language, but up there he'll understand. We go back to Washington, D.C., when I was working in a place called the Wayne Room, which 40 striptease girls and me. And Don was working across the street in something worse. And he'd come over every night with a tape recorder and sit in this Wayne Room. And I'd say, "What are you doing with the tape recorder?" "I want to catch how you insult people and get away with it. You're a rude son of a bitch. Rude." I said, "Yeah, but I can't talk funny like you." And he said, "I don't talk funny. That's the way I talk." And I said, "Well, you should be in a home because you're talking ridiculous." In Hooray for Hollywood, we We did this show it was an hour special, and he'd get angry. He had quite a temper at times. And I would kid around. He would make me laugh, you know. He would just walk in and say, all right, let's do this scene. And I'd start to laugh. God damn it, you're ruining everything. And he'd go into the room like a kid and close the door, like a little boy. Don, I'm not coming out because you're ridiculous. I can't work with a man that's not professional. I swear this is what went on. But he was part and soul of my life. We never hung out together too much because when I worked in Chicago in a place called the Black Orchid, he sat off stage in a little room right off the stage with 5 of his crony friends at that time, Paul Raffles, rest his soul, another guy. And they played cards, and I was on the stage in those days doing impressions badly and bad jokes, and he was in there going, Ace of clubs, 9 of hearts. And I was up there breaking my kumquats trying to be funny while he was yelling out his card game. And then we went over to Hugh Hefner's Playboy Club. And Don knew everybody. Hello, Shirley, you're looking wonderful. Hello, Sally, you're looking great. And I was standing in the corner getting pimples. Hef knows me a long time, but I was never big up at the Playboy Mansion because, you know, I was kind of a guy that was pretty devoted to one girl. And after some 40 years, I still am with that lady, and she knew Don. We were very close with Dorothy, who, God bless her, who was his first wife. I don't know the second or the third. The fourth I met, I don't know, on the highway. I don't know. God bless them all, but he had them lined up. I said, who are you calling? My wife! But the Dorothy days I was there when Stacy was a little girl, we had great times together. And I must say, in my heart, about a year ago, I think, Barbara, it's about a year ago, I called him on the phone. Just funny how God gives you a push. And I said, because I never really saw him too much. I'd see him on the street once in a while. He wasn't in good shape. And by the way, I knew about he was told about his terrific record in Tarawa and how he got wounded and shot up and everything. I was in the Navy 3.5 years. I was supposed to do comedy, and they sent me to the Philippines to shoot Japanese people. And I said, I do comedy. They said, keep firing. Anyway, I didn't have the career Don did. I should have got shot so I could have been a big hit tonight. But after you brought up 17 dead Marines and 12 bodies, I figured I'm going to come up here with a Yortzeit candle and just get my... Those of you that don't know what a Yortzeit, it's a memorial candle. You know. You were great, by the way. I got so depressed when I was listening to you. I wanted to say, Don should be dead. He didn't want to hear this, for crying out loud. Don't misunderstand. I was a serviceman, and I was in there. I was in World War II, and that's all they kept saying. I said, I do comedy and jokes. Fine. Just go over there, comedy and joke. Next thing you know, I'm in the Philippines. The guy's going, oh, are you a Jew? Anyway, getting away from my story of life with Don, my wife and I called him, and we went over to, at that time, La Dolce Vita. And it was just Don, myself, and my wife. And it was an emotional night for me as I think about it now, because we reminisced about the great fun we had together, the good times. We even talked about the racetrack. I was never a guy that went to a racetrack. He was the first guy to take me to Santa Anita, and a big race, and one of his horses at the time was running, and the horse lost. And Don said, let's go down to the winner's circle. I said, well, your horse lost. He said, we're going to grab the second horse, and you're going to give him a flower. God's truth. I was in the winner's circle with the losing horse. And the jockey said, what are you doing? I said, I'm with him. I don't know what I'm doing. Things like that he did. But we had great moments, and our souls were bound. I can say that because I believe it was so, because we had great respect for each other and a great love. And I tell you tonight, there are many men in this business. He was unique. He was not easy with people, but if he loved you, forget about it. I was blessed. To his family here tonight, I give you my heartfelt sympathy. And wherever his soul is, and someday I'll meet him, please God. And I tell you, he was 1 in 1 million because he was different, he was beautiful, and God gave him a good heart. Rest in peace, Don.
Of course, my most enduring memories of Don are of standing beside him on the set on our marks, waiting and waiting and waiting for the lights to be adjusted and my hair to be sprayed and the cameras to roll. And one day I remember that out of utter boredom, he aimed his gun at a parrot who was on a perch between us. And thinking that the gun was not loaded, he pulled the trigger and bang, the parrot fainted. And I almost did too. And another time when we had just finished shooting on top of a mountain, and he offered to drive me back to the studio in the little blue Opal. And he got in the car and put it in reverse and started to back us off over the cliff. But that seemed completely unremarkable to me at the time because at that time, I just related to Don as 99 to 86. But gradually, over the 5 years that we waited next to each other, bits of Don began to seep through Max that were of an entirely different nature. He was intelligent, and he had an interest in history and in writing poetry. And little by little, he became, for me, half Max and half Don. Now, standing here, speaking to you as half Barbara, half Agent 99, I try to imagine what she would say at a memorial for Max. And I think in her adoring, oh, Max kind of way, she would say that the bungling, acerbic, brittle 86 was only a cover, a clever disguise, and that underneath was a very sentimental and very smart man that was very dear to her heart. And I think she would say that she would always cherish the sometimes bumpy years they shared and the exhilaration of riding on his energy as they saved the world from chaos for a little fantasy time. I think that's what 99 would say about Max. And as it happens, that's exactly what I feel about Don.
Don and I were dealing with the D word. He was not a fan of the phenomenon. He was not crazy about death. So in the middle of it, I said, well, think about this. You're a fan of poetry. Of all the wonders in the world, it seems to me most strange that men should fear, seeing that death, a necessary end, will come when 'twill come. Cowards die many times before their death. The valiant never taste of death but once. There was a long pause. He said, Schmucko, once is enough. Fear actually got Don and me together. I'd been part of a comedy team, Gene Wood and Bill Dana and Wood. And I was absolutely frightened, terror-stricken. Until we got on stage, we got our first laugh, and it was great. Then it was hard to get off. But on and on and on, I kept saying, every time I got off stage, I can't do this. And we broke up, and I went to my manager, Mace Neufeld, who is here tonight. Mason Sherwin managed Dana and Wood, and he said, well, you want to write... Helen and I saw this guy at the Ruban Blue. Let's go over and see him. So this fella comes out, slim. He scratched his head and he said, forgive me if I seem a little nervous and upset. But today's my anniversary. I've been broke for 10 years. And he went on, and he did good. He was going along fine. And then it happened. He said, you know, I'm a big fan of William Powell as the Thin Man. And he got about 6.5 inches taller, and he said, there's your man, Inspector. A liar, a cheat, a thief, and a homicidal maniac. But he's my son, and I love him. So I turned to Mace. I said, this guy is good. And we met him, and then Mace and Sherwin signed him up. And we started working together. And it was magic. And it was, that's the word. It was just everything we were doing seemed to work. And then Mace got him on the Steve Allen show. And he got out there and he started doing the routines that we had written in that voice. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, for the past 20 minutes I've sat idly by while the prosecuting attorney has stood up here and made a complete ass of himself. Now it's my turn. This could be Coral's speech. I know a lot of you. And then we got together and we did the football coach, and we decided then we were going to do an Alfred Hitchcock. We would put his real name and my real name would be in each routine. So it was, now Sasbury, you're a good end, and Yarmy, you're a good quarterback. And a good end and a good quarterback go hand in hand. But not on the campus, giving the student body a feeling of insecurity. And then we were just talking about the umpire school. It's always men. Welcome to umpire school. It's going to be a tough road to hoe. Some of you will make it. Others will crack. Those of you who make it will go on to great things. And those of you who crack will be umpires. And as Don can attest, Don Rickles can attest, this is over 50 years ago, and this stuff still lives today, as will the memory of Don. It was my total introduction. It was such a paradox that here I am talking about the valiant never taste of death, but once talking about fear, and it was literally fear that gave me a career, that got me involved with Don. It's a fascinating time to sit here with friends and family and think about Don and reach in your pocket and see what you're forgetting. Not much. Wrap it up, it says. Anyway, Don, we're going to see you at a later date, TBA, to be announced. And we'll see you at the angel races. And thanks, Donnie. I ain't scared anymore.
Okay. My name is Gloria Burton, and I'm Don's sister. And standing here, I just know that Don is in the chief's office listening to all of this, and I know what he's saying. Would you believe my sister, the worst traveler in the world, got on a plane this morning during Rosh Hashanah and to be here for my memorial and to say nice things, I hope. But I've got plenty of nice things to say about Don. We were so proud when he came back from Guadalcanal, and we would go out to dinner with my brother Richard, Mom and Dad, and he would be in his dress blues, very impressive, and people would come over and want to buy him dinner or a drink or something like that to show their appreciation. Donald was a very artistic fellow. Some of you may even have a painting or sketch of his. I know I do. And he was also kind of quirky. My brothers didn't have favorite people. They had favorite jockeys and horses. And he was witty, and also we were very competitive. We would play games like involving movies. And I remember I would say, I'd have to give him a movie, and I'd say, Rebecca, I want 7 actors from that movie. And then we'd time him, and he'd have to give the 7 actors in a hurry. And then we'd go on and on until we were out of movies, I can tell you that. And then we loved the book Prisoner of Zenda, and it was a movie with Ronald Colman. And one day we sat down and we collaborated, and we wrote a script called The King Lives for Get Smart. It was a spoof. We liked to write together. And I can tell you that while he went on to be Maxwell Smart, to me, he will always be Donald James Yarmy. Thank you.
It's nice to be here with all of you fellow New Yorkers in New York West. I don't know how the Yanks are doing tonight, but I'm going to keep rooting for them. I'm here because I'm lucky enough to still be around. Donnie was 10 and I was 8 on the west side of New York when we met each other with his wonderful, gone also cousins, the twins Bob and Bill Carvelis, and formed a nucleus which we call then and still think about as the Spartans. I mention that because I have a notion in listening and seeing and following that those 72 years, one can go back to the beginning and see all the seeds that have sprouted so beautifully as they have through the years. When I read Miss Felden's comments in the press after Don's passing, and she talked of his intelligence, I said, God, I'm so glad people will know that. Don was one of the most natural, intelligent people I'd ever known. Not a lot of schooling, but a lot of learning all the time. When Bob and Bill, who were our star athletes and the heroes of the west side of New York, or our area of the west side, Don had a lot of competition. He showed it by taking the games we played, Ringalivio and Red Rover, and with that intelligence and that love of history that has been talked about, suddenly our games in Riverside Park were the Crusades, and were Russians crossing the border, made up by Don, performed by all of us under his direction. A little linking of things, and Donald and Bob and Bill went off to the Marines. I was a couple of years younger. I couldn't make the service just yet. And Don came back from a naval hospital in California. I mention this because, you know, not everybody goes from New York to California. Don was in the naval hospital. He came home on leave, and he said, Stan, he said, you got to help me. I don't want to go back to California. I said, well, how are we going to do that? You have orders. They require you to go back to California. He said, I know how we'll do it. Now, he had had black water fever. I think that's a form of malaria. We went up to his cousin's room at 328 West 83rd Street, and Donald brought with him a bottle of gin, and you know he doesn't like to drink. He said, Stanley, sit with me, keep pouring gin, and I'll come down with an attack of malaria. And then you're going to call Hart's Island Naval Hospital. That's in the Bronx. And they'll come and they'll pick me up, and I'll get stationed in New York. That's what we did. The statute of limitations has long since run, so I can tell that story, although I'm still around, but it's still run. And Donald did come to New York at Hart's Island to complete his recovery and to be stationed here. I'm very proud to say that there was an early beginning, even before then, but at least at that time, there were amateur hours in New York in 1943 at the Brooklyn Paramount and the Loewy's Paradise. And Don and I would go, and Donald, a very talented man, wearing a green dress uniform with ribbons across his chest, he could not lose. And every amateur hour he did his impressions, and every amateur hour he won first place, $25. And Donald was on his way. Donald was bigger than life in many ways. Sure, there were moments of difficulty, but his love of the humanity around him was always there. His start, I think, in showbiz was on West 83rd Street. There was a street lamp. It was like a spotlight. And late at night, a group of 5 or 6 of us would gather around in a circle under that light, and we would have what we called the Imitation Olympics. And that was quite a group. We could have won world championships. That was Don Yarmy. That was Larry Storch. It was Larry's kid brother, Jay Storch, later Jay Lawrence. And they were fabulous. Whether it was Jimmy Cagney or Eddie G. Robinson or Winston Churchill or Franklin Roosevelt, or in the case of Don, William Powell doing the Thin Man. Here were these guys at age 14 and 15 showing all the talent that later grew on F Troop for Larry. Quite a crowd. Larry was a star catcher for our baseball team as well. And Donald really took off from that period after the war. He got onto the Godfrey Show. I'm not going to go through his history. But he was such a wide-ranging lover of learning. He was so proud of his friends. When I was at law school, he used to check me out with his routines of the defense attorney to see if he was doing anything wrong. He wanted it to be valid, and I saw some of the stuff we worked on up there tonight. Don was irreverent. You had to have pretty thick skin sometimes when you were with Don. I remember as the years went by, I decided to make a shot at local New York politics and the reform movement, trying to clean up the Democratic Party. And I was announcing my candidacy in Jackson Heights, Queens, and Donald came out to help me by providing a little entertainment. In Jackson Heights, Queens, there was a German beer hall, which we had rented for the occasion. And Donald did his routine, and he talked about his friend Stanley, who he grew up with. And Stanley tonight is embarking on what I know will be a great political career. Only one thing worries me, he said. That other person who started his political career in a beer hall. When I came back from the service, serving in Europe, I remember being on a bus one day, and he would not stop. Stanley, tell me about the German army. Tell me. He was into Adolf Hitler. He had read everything. It was about 1946. He'd read everything about Nazi Germany. He had served in the Pacific. He'd gotten into the subject of the history of Germany and Nazi Germany, and had made himself almost an expert on the subject. Thus his mind worked all the time. That irreverence, I was thinking that Donnie Silverstein, who many of you know, and he's not able to get around too much these days, lives in Florida. Adams, Dana Silverstein, you remember that ad agency? Donnie asked me to please say hello to everybody who was gathered here. But we had a little celebration at the Lutece. It was a night of many things happening, Dorothy. She remembers so well. So I set up dinner at Lutece for Donnie Silverstein and his wife for the night. They had reconciled for that night. And Dorothy and Don and my wife Gloria, myself, and Bill Carvelis and his wife Dorothy. And I was so proud that I had done a bit of traveling, so I had arranged that there be served what they call, some people, a champagne royal, champagne luxe. It's, you know, cassis with champagne instead of white wine and some other liqueur. And I had arranged that there be a salmon dish called saumon à l'ossé. And I was very proud of that evening, proud of the food and proud of the ambience. And at the end of it, Donald said, "Stanley, why are you serving us raspberry juice and salmon croquettes the way the nuns used to serve it to us?" He was irreverent, and you had to take it. My own view about Don Adams is, as I said, he was a natural. He has given so many of us. I think, without overstating it, worldwide. I recall when I was playing host in about 1965 in Washington, where I was serving the Kennedy and then Johnson administration. And I had a visit from a judge from Thailand, the Dika Court. It's the Supreme Court of Thailand. And suddenly my children ran upstairs. I said, "Why are they running upstairs?" I said, "They're running upstairs to see a show we have here. It's called Get Smart." And this Thai judge said, "Get Smart? My kids love it too." And I realized that this universality, the New York Times editorial recently, or in the editorial section, talked about the humanity of Get Smart. It talked about Don's ability and his fellow performers' ability to cross over so many gaps and to reach inside. And if I may be serious only for a moment, God knows in these days of division and divisiveness, that spirit of reaching across and touching other human beings, that's what Don gave us. I've loved him all these years for that and always will.
I should have wore a louder shirt to recognize me. Where's Dorothy? Hi, honey. I'm just here to tell you how wonderful it was for me to have known Don, Dorothy. I mean, I was a little whippersnapper, and they took me in and made me a member of their family, Dorothy and Don. And I tried my best to embarrass them at every moment. And he not only gave me the gift of friendship, but I also got the gift of being friends with all his friends, who I still have today. And he actually introduced me to the wonderful world of the comic, Andley Wolfberg. And there isn't a subject I don't think that I can, that anybody could bring up where I wouldn't have some sort of funny thing that I remembered. I mean, any subject in the world, whether that Donnie, something funny he said, something funny he did, something funny he stumbled over. I mean, so I just, I'll tell you one of my favorite. And we were playing golf. I didn't play golf, but I had to play because he said so. And I had played maybe 5 or 6 times, and I guess there was this ritual at Riviera where everybody got on the first tee, and the process took maybe an hour or 2 before we teed off, because you're going to give me so many strokes, and here are the rules, and of course, little Hitler took over, and that was it. So he said to me, "You're going to give me 4 strokes." I said, "What are you, nuts? I played 5 times. You played 30 years. Aren't you embarrassed to ask for strokes?" He goes, "No." And then I watched him swing, and I thought it was a fair bet. I swear to you, every time the man swung, I had to call up the vet ward to see if there was a bed empty. I have never seen a swing like that in my life. Anyway, he said, "We're playing winter rules." Fine, Donnie. And the truth is, this argument went on all the time. Did I mention that Lee was there? Yeah. It went on, and nobody ever got paid. I mean, it didn't matter how long the argument went on, nobody got paid. Anyway, we play, and we played, if any of you who know Riviera, we played the backside first because of the crowd, and we wound up on the front side. The only reason that's relevant is the 9th hole that we finished on was the hole that was sat right underneath where all the members putted and everybody hung out, so you could see down on the 9th hole. Anyway, we got into that last hole, and I had him shut out. I had him 3-way. So knowing I'm not going to get paid, I was a big shot. I said, "Listen, I'll give you a half a shot, a shot and a half on the last hole." "You got it." Okay. I hit a shot, luckily down the middle. I don't know how that happened. He hit one left, which always happened. Then he hit another one left. I saw it go near the sand trap, and I luckily hit some ball that went up on the green. Didn't know where it was, but it was up on the 9th green somewhere. So I saw Donnie go to his ball by the sand trap, still about 100 yards away from the green, and I took the cart up and around, and as I'm walking down the backside of the green, he doesn't see me. I'm walking down the back of it, and I stood there, and I watched the man move his ball, but I don't mean a little bit. I mean, he was hitting it from this thick elephant grass and just kept tapping it and tapping it and tapping it. And I just stood there and wondered, like, how long is it going to be before he sees me? And he tapped it till he got it on the fringe of the green. And at that point, I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "We're playing winter rules." I said, "You can't move the ball from the rough to the you can't move it to the green. That's not." He says, "You moved it on the fairway." I said, "I'm on the fairway. I rolled it over. That's winter rules." Well, he started to scream so that everybody in the neighborhood was aware of what was happening. Screaming at me, screaming. I took it for a little while, and then I ran down the hill. I literally picked him up about to here, over my head, threw him on the green, jumped on his chest, pried his mouth open, and I put a golf ball in it. Now I looked down, and I had never seen anything funnier in my life, and I just rolled. I was crying. I fell off. Everybody was laughing. I rolled over. I was done. And Don got up, brushed himself off, and took the golf ball and went, "Remind me never to go bowling with you." That's one. Every time I think of him, I laugh and I smile, and I miss him. I love him, and Dorothy, I will always love you, my favorite girl, and all I can do is smile and cry at the same time. So, thank you, Donnie.
Hi, my name is Freddie Metrick, and I'm surprised at the turnout tonight because for 60 years I thought I was his only friend. And it looks like I was always under the impression that his kids didn't like him, and nobody would show up at his funeral, and that his wives didn't like him, and nobody would show up at his funeral or his memorial. But everybody did. And one thing that really surprised me, if you noticed the video, if you saw the three wives, Dell, Dorothy, and Judy, they were really beautiful when he married them. And they're still beautiful, but he knew how to pick good-looking women. Now, I knew Dell when she only had Carolyn. And we used to play a game of Nux, Don and I and another fellow named Nookie. Yeah. You know by his name what he was. And Dell was pregnant with Christine. And she was 9 months pregnant. And we were playing this card game, and Dell said, "I think I have to go to the hospital." Don says, wait a minute, I'm losing. We weren't playing for money, we were just playing knucks. You know, we just took the cards and smashed them against your knuckles until we broke every knuckle in your body. And he said, I'm losing. And Dell says, I'm getting very itchy. I think I have to go to the hospital. And I said, Don, maybe we should, forget about the game and take her to the hospital. He says, I'm losing. I'm not leaving now. So Dell got out, and she got in the car, and she started up the car. And then I said, we got to go. This girl is serious. So we all went to the hospital, but we took the cards, and we continued the game in the hospital room. Now, I was at Christine's birth, and then I was at Kathy's birth, her third daughter. And lo and behold, 20, 30 years later, Kathy married my son. So then we became family. Although he always was my best friend, and I didn't need him to be in the family. And we share the same granddaughter who's sitting here tonight. And I kind of think, I want to tell you one little story about, I don't know if you know that he gambled on horses. But he and I went to the track for about, I'd say about 2 weeks, about maybe 3 weeks. I think it was, we went for 8 or 9 races a day, 5 days a week. And every race, he lost thousands of dollars, every race. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. Then next week, we took off for 2 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I can't imagine. I even walked away from the table. I didn't want to be near him because it was becoming a problem. Just sitting with a man kept tearing up tickets. And finally, on the 16th day, he hit a $150 exacta, 2 horses running together. And he looked over at me and he said, "I told you I was the best handicapper in the world." Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Mace Neufeld, and I'm here to celebrate Don because he was a very special part of my life beginning in 1954, 55 years ago, if you're counting. My late wife, Helen, and I had just gone to see a premiere of The Desperate Hours starring Frederick March, and we decided to go over to one of the small East Side supper clubs, which I haunted in these early days when I was beginning my management business. We'd just gotten our drinks when the MC came out, and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, may I direct your attention and applause to Don Adams." And he came out and he said, "Good evening. My name is Don Adams. I know that most of you have never heard of me, but I know you've heard of my father, who's a great star in show business. He's a star of cabaret, Broadway, radio, films, and I know when I mention his name, a smile will come to your lips, a tear will come to your eyes. You'll nudge each other and say, 'So that's his kid.'" His name was, what the hell was his name? I was just talking about him this morning. It's right on the tip of my tongue. I'm reading this because I couldn't memorize it. And then Don proceeded to do a brilliant 30 minutes of stand-up. I was so excited that after his set, I went backstage and I said, "That was a great show. Do you have a manager?" He said, "What's a manager?" I said, "I'm a manager and I'd like to sign you." He took my number, and to my surprise, the next morning he called me, came up to what I laughingly referred to as my office, and we began a 20-year relationship. As Bill Dana told you, at the time I was handling him, and I brought him in to see Don, and I suggested a great deal. Nobody had any money, so Don was going to give 10% of his salary to Bill, and Bill would write for him. At the time, Don was making $189 a week, and he paid $18.90 a week to Bill. I didn't bother to collect my 10% from Bill. I figured he needed $1.89 more than I did. That collaboration eventually led to Get Smart, because when Don appeared on the Steve Allen show, Steve Allen asked who wrote his material. Don said Bill Dana. Steve hired Bill. Bill became a well-known comedy writer, eventually did the Jose Jimenez routine, got his own show, hired Don to play Glick, the house detective, and that eventually morphed into Agent 86 on Get Smart. The years that Don and I were together were a great time for me, and I like to think for Don as well. He entered the pantheon of unforgettable comedy stars, and my management company flourished as well. But under that exterior, Don loved his family first, his friends second, and in no particular order, cards, the horses, and golf. I remember one of his golf routines in which he said, "I was playing with my partner Jack Nicholson in the Pro-Am. I hit my ball into a creek, buried in mud, under a bridge. I turned to Jack and I said, 'Jack, how do you think I should play this shot?' He said, 'Under an assumed name.'" "Well, Jack, what club should I use?" "Have you ever used a 1-iron?" I said, "No, only to kill a snake." We had a close personal relationship in those days, and Don once showed up unexpectedly at a birthday party for my son, and he proceeded to spend 30 minutes entertaining a bunch of 8-year-olds. He said he just wanted to try out some new material on a more sophisticated crowd. Our professional relationship ended in 1975 when I gave up management to try my hand at producing full-time. When Don saw my first picture, The Omen, he said, "It was a really good picture, but Dick Donner only made one mistake." I said, "What was that?" He said, "I could have done the Gregory Peck role." Just last month, as things happen, I was having dinner at Dan Tanner's when Don came in with his family. I hadn't seen him for a long time. I got up and went over to the table. We shook hands as if we'd never been apart. He leaned over to me and he said, "When are you going to cast me in a picture?" I said, "As soon as I find one that's good enough for you." What Don accomplished as an actor and a director and a writer, he accomplished seemingly without effort. But behind those roles were a tremendous amount of thought, work, and yes, brilliance. I think of him right now smiling wryly at this entire service and getting ready to get his next assignment from the chief under the cone of silence. Thank you.
I was not in the Marines. I was, however, in the Navy. I don't like to speak about my heroism, but I was a librarian. And I kept America safe from overdue books. They say comparisons are odious, but I'm going to do it anyway because Don comes out pretty good in this comparison. Working with stars in comedy can be a very tricky business. I remember working with one star in particular, and I had what I thought was a brilliant line. This star decided to take the line. I didn't have it. He took it. I remember working with another star, and I got a laugh, and I felt something like an ice pick in my arm. And the idea came to me very quickly that he was supposed to get the laughs and nobody else was. And I wondered when I got the job in 1966 as Siegfried on Get Smart, how would Don Adams react if, God forbid, I was funny? Well, Don had this wonderful generosity of spirit attitude about comedy. And if I can put it into words, it was if they hire somebody to be funny and they're funny, it enriches the whole thing. So let whoever can be funny be funny. That was a revelation to me. And the very beginning of 5 years without a contract, I might add. which was a very nervous time for me because I was doing the Marlo Thomas show and Get Smart, sometimes both in the same week. I didn't have a contract with either of them. But whenever I came up with something funny, Don appreciated it. He respected it. He respected me. And it was a wonderful coming together. And I will never forget that, as opposed to those other comedy stars who didn't have that generous attitude. That was wonderful. I think the biggest problem we had in 5 years was cracking up. There was one episode we did in a Chinese restaurant, and Don was eating wonton soup, and he said, this is after taking a sip. He said, oh, this is the worst kreplach I've ever eaten. And I think Gary Nelson was directing it. I could not get through it. He couldn't get through it. And Gary came up with the most serious face, and he said, my father gave me a medallion, and he took a medallion out of his pocket, and he said, whenever I get into trouble, I should hold on to this medallion, and my trouble passes. Well, that medallion became the funniest medallion in the world. There was another episode we did in the submarine, and Don was going to do something to trick me into putting down my gun. And I got down the periscope and I said, the trick is stupid, the trick is dumb, and the trick is working. And we couldn't get, it was supposed to be a two-shot, and we couldn't do it. We could not do it. So they had to, I mean, Gary had to put it, have two different shots, two different singles of it. Don had a big fight with a huge, monstrous oaf. And the guy, this is back in the Chinese restaurant. Every time the oaf hit Don, Don would bounce off one of these big, this huge gong, and it would just boom, 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 boom. And he was cornered by this big guy, and he looked at the guy was towering over him, and Don said, you moronic oaf, and he smacked him right in the jaw, and the guy didn't move. He kept looking at him, and he gave him another insult, and the guy didn't move again. He gave him another shot in the gut. The guy did not move. Don takes a pause, and he said, gee, I hope I wasn't out of line about that crack about you being a moronic oaf. I remember the tremendous fun we had when Don and Dorothy lived on, was it Rexford? We played tennis there. We had all kinds of fun. Don was probably betting on the sides and the doubles. Remember running into Don at the track. I never go to the track, but I was there with Dickie Van Patten. And I said, Don, how did you do today? He said, I had a wonderful day. Only lost $5,000. But he was an inveterate gambler, and I'm sure you know about the gamble that he took in getting his salary for Get Smart. He was either offered $12,000 or $4,000 and a piece of the show. He took the latter, and that made him very happy for the rest of his life. I will be eternally grateful for my time with Don. His joy in comedy, his acceptance, his respect for comedians. Thank you, Don. Thank you for all the laughs, all the wonderful things, all the wonderful times we had. I have a picture here, and it's with Don and Barbara, and you can come and take a look at it later on. This is in the submarine, and everybody, you can't see it from there, but you'll see it later on. Everybody is very serious, and I'm threatening Don and Barbara. And some unknown photographer was taking pictures, and within the next second, somebody said something funny, and you can see Don and Barbara and myself are laughing our silly faces off. And that's the Don I want to remember always, laughing. Come and take a look at it later on. Thank you.
I have to work from a script. I've been under a great deal of stress lately. I'm a Red Sox fan. Those of you who may recognize me certainly wouldn't recognize me through my connection with Don. The fact is that some years ago we spent 3 seasons working together on a half-hour series in Canada, which for Don was like going to Senegal. I'd been a resident of Canada for a number of years, so I taught Don how to speak Canadian, while he taught me some of the rules of comedy. And this was really my first brush with television history, getting to work with Don Adams. I have to say that the greatest gift that he gave me was, well, just his endorsement and the confidence to go for it, and the permission to go for it, that's a great gift for an actor, just to be given that kind of green light. He was fearless, and he allowed me to be fearless as well. I was going to, tell the same story everybody's been telling about how, they couldn't get through a scene without cracking up, and basically that happened to me. There was one day when they had to shoot us separately, which they almost did, actually. Once the show ended, I lost touch with Don, but I would keep up occasionally through news with him through Cecily and Jim. And a few years ago, my girlfriend Susan, who's a freelance journalist, invited me to join her for a function at the Playboy Mansion. But realizing that her presence at the event would effectively defeat the purpose of my own, I opted for Monday Night Football at home. And around halftime, I got a phone call. "Hello, Gordon. Don Adams. Listen, I'm at the Playboy Mansion in the company of a beautiful young journalist. And the news is, I'm in, you're out." He congratulated me on not only my taste in beautiful young journalists, but on my success with NYPD Blue. And he added, "And one of these days, I'm going to get around to watching that show." I talked him into visiting the set. He only lived across the street. He stayed long enough to watch the scene once and order a cup of coffee. He left before the coffee arrived, mumbling something about a commitment to be at the DMV in 20 minutes. And after that, I saw him once or twice at Norby Walters events, but I regret that we never had our night on the town. I have 2 other regrets. One is that I took up golf after our time together, so I never got to play with Don. But I wore my golf shoes tonight. The other regret is I wish I could have seen Don in a dramatic role. I took a 2-month hiatus from Check It Out to, which was the name of the series I did in Canada. That was somewhere in the stuff that I didn't read. I took a 2-month hiatus from Check It Out to do a movie called 8 Men Out. And Don asked if the role of Arnold Rothstein had been cast. And when I told him that Michael Lerner was playing the part, he said that they'd never see him in a serious role anyway. So I told him, well, that's because you're too damn good at the other thing. So.
To the best of my knowledge, I'm Leonard Stern. For the past 10 days, Don has held my memory hostage. I've been reliving Get Smart 24/7. And I have a tremendous regret right now that I'm unable to do what Don and I had done in the past. This is a great time for rewriting a script and changing the ending.
Get Smart was a unique relationship. You can see and you've heard the rapport that exists among all the players. And it was true behind the scenes as well. And nothing concerning Get Smart was done in a conventional way. Even our very beginning, seeing Dan Melnick and Barbara Feldon here brought back to mind a marvelous panorama of strange happenings. Get Smart was, Dan Melnick was my partner at Town Associates, and he came up with the idea for Get Smart. And he was smart enough to hire Mel Brooks and Buck Henry to write it. Dan also had a fascination with a young, gifted actress whom he felt was inordinately talented. That actress was Barbara Feldon, and he put her under contract to do 99 and Get Smart before we had sold the script, possibly before we had finished it. And this conviction was marvelous, but it never was a problem until Don became 86. And then suddenly we had a height problem, Barbara's height. Don had no awareness of Barbara. It was just he knew that we had signed someone. And so Dan and I spoke on the phone. Dan was in New York, and I was out here, and he said, how do we handle this with Don? Dan said, why not run a film of Barbara's, which he did with Craig Stevens. She's so damn good in this that height will become a secondary issue once Don sees the film. So Dan shipped the film out, and I arranged for Don to see it with 4 or 5 of us. And Dan was right. Barbara was delicious, delectable, and quintessentially 99 in the role she played. When it was finished, we all looked toward Don, who said, "My God, she's almost as tall as Craig Stevens." Pat Harris, our casting director, broke the long silence by saying, "Barbara's a former model. She knows how to slouch." She says, we'll get her to bend her knees or wear flats, if necessary, give up wearing shoes. Don said, would she be willing to do this? And Pat said, why not? She did it for Craig Stevens. Well, you can hear Don's voice. With shoes, she's taller than Craig Stevens. And then that indelible humor that always exists, he broke into a smile and said, she's perfect, she's 99. Just do me one favor. Make my shoe phone heels higher by at least an inch, which we did do. The show had, when our show was sold, it was late in the pilot season. All the other pilots were being sent east. We couldn't possibly edit ours and put it together in time. So what we did was a truncated version of it, a quickie, series of cuts and editing, but done logically. So it looked like a movie. We weighed whether we could deliver this to NBC when they showed the pilot to all of their affiliates and the critics. We decided to take a chance, and we sent this abbreviated film in. What we didn't realize or know, nor did NBC, was that a critic, a newspaper critic from the Herald Tribune, was in the audience. And the next day he reviewed the whole forthcoming season. And the headline was, Get Smart, a tremendous hit. And his commentary was, the show moves so quickly. it makes a half hour seem like 15 minutes. He was wrong. It was 7 minutes and 23 seconds. The only negative note we received on the pilot came from NBC executives. They claimed that testing said that we should eliminate Don's strident delivery. Don personally answered that note with a letter saying, why not eliminate testing suggestions? And how right he was. 4 weeks after the show premiered, Maxwell Smart was the most imitated voice in America. When one of our spaceships had some minor trouble and one of the astronauts radioed back to Earth and said in Don's delivery, sorry about that, Chief. What an endorsement. What a remarkable impact. As has been indicated, Dick Gautier reading the letter of how it affected people's lives and the humor, the perceptions. It was an exhilarating time to work. There was nothing comparable. And as a consequence, we could experiment. And because it delivered numbers, we were protected. You can be a visionary as long as you develop or deliver a 30% audience. I'm just looking to say, look at some notes. Last night, I spoke to Jay Sandrich, who couldn't be here. And he said, are you going to talk about the gum surgery? And suddenly I remembered something we had forgotten. We are doing about our 7th episode of Get Smart, and Don used to come into the office of Jay, who was then producing the first year of the show, and petition to direct a film. And as has been indicated, Don was visually sound. He was an artist, and he had a unique perception and perspective. He was constantly doing his own storyboards. And he knew all the terminology of a director or film. And we didn't want him to get involved in directing in the first year, so we always invented excuses. This day he came up earlier than usual to make what we thought it was his plea, except it wasn't a plea in his eye, it was pain. And he explained that he had finished his shots and he was leaving early to go have gum surgery, and he'd see us tomorrow. And we said, good luck and take care and all. It wasn't until 10 minutes later we were, wait a moment, he's shooting tomorrow and he's having gum surgery tonight or this afternoon? How much Maxwell Smart that is. There's no schism any longer between Don and the character. So we decided to search for Don and get hold of his dentist. We called everyone who was remotely related to Don to get the name of the dentist. No one knew Don's dentist's name. Don had an anonymous dentist. That sounds like a redundancy. So we didn't know what to do but plan for the morrow. We went on the set and figured when Don comes, we will plan to shoot one side. The question was which side. The AD said, I know. He said it's his left side. So he said, okay, left side. Let's plan all the shots so that we use Don in profile and we use his right jaw. And we relit the set, and we had crucial moments planned. It was an involved but necessary moment, or we'd have to shut down the next day, and that would be cost a small fortune. When Don came in the following morning, sure enough, he had had a jaw operation, and his jaw was swollen. But it was his right jaw, the one from whom we had planned all these changes. And we challenged the AD who said it was left. And Don said, no, he's right. before this becomes an Abbott Costello routine that the left is right, how did it left become right? Don said, camera left. And suddenly the director had taken over, and I think, if I remember, because I got a note from the New York office, that surgery cost us $27,000, the cost of a day's shooting. Another interesting thing, I enjoyed Don tremendously. He was, as obviously, a hidden or closet intellect by choice. I don't know why he did that, but that behavior was consistent. What worried me more and concerned me more, his unwillingness to enjoy what he was doing. He never really cherished a moment. He'd look at the films and in his pursuit of excellence, always find something to criticize. And I kept saying to him over the years, relax. It's rewarding. You're stealing from yourself. It's a theft of joy. No success. And over the years, whenever there were reruns and syndication, Don and I would get together, but never to reminisce, always to re-edit. It wasn't until a year or so ago when there was a fair at the Museum of Broadcasting honoring Don and Get Smart that Don said to me, drew me aside as a matter of fact, and said, in the last 2 months, I've watched all 138 episodes. And I said, and? And he said, and loving it. And I felt immeasurably better. Thank you.
Good evening. I am Dorothy Adams Ferrante, and I would like to thank everybody who came here tonight to honor Don and to celebrate his amazing life. I know he would have loved this evening. I have some names of some people I'd like to acknowledge who were really a major help in putting this evening together. Jim Beaver, host extraordinaire. Bill Anderson, who did the film. Nancy Barr, Lee Wolfberg, Pat Van Patten, Rita Vale, and Sue Kessler, and of course, all of our wonderful speakers. Thank you so much. Last but not least, I'd like to say something for my children, Stacy and Sean, and for myself. We thank Don for his legacy of laughter, and we will miss him and love him forever. Thank you.
It's interesting, it's been mentioned the influence that Get Smart had. It's just something that occurred to me a moment ago. There's a new program on one of the networks about life in the CIA, I think, called E-Ring. And it's a very serious drama about secret agents and all that sort. In the premiere episode, Benjamin Bratt, the star, goes through the depths of the Pentagon and finally makes his way to his office door and puts his hand on the handprint recognition device and waits for the codes to click through, and while he's waiting, he whistles the Get Smart theme. I hope Martin Landau will forgive me for mentioning this story. He doesn't know anything about this, but before I could ever make a living as an actor, I started out in this business writing television, and I was writing for the revived version of the Alfred Hitchcock show in the late 80s when I first met Cecily, and even then I knew how very badly Don wanted to play serious roles, to have the opportunity, and I wrote a role for him in an episode of the new Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and predictably the producers said, well, he's got that voice. And I said, well, he doesn't have that voice except when he's playing Maxwell Smart. And I fought with him, but I was really, really new in the business, and I didn't fight hard enough. And dear Marty Landau ended up playing the role. But I called Don to tell him that it had fallen through and it just wasn't going to happen, and how sorry I was. And there was a pause, and he said, To hell with Alfred Hitchcock. Can you get me a meeting with Martin Scorsese? I met Cecily at a theater here in Los Angeles called Theater West. She had gone there because of Don's brother Dick, who was a member there, and Dick's wife Alice Borden, who was a member there, and they had invited Cecily. And I had become a member there, and that's where we met. And one of the special things in my many years at Theater West at a time like this is when one of our members has passed, we offer them the performer's greatest thanks and appreciation, and I think it would play very well here if, before we leave, we all give Don Adams one last standing ovation.